Nintendo teased it again in issue number 5, when they talked about a contest to win a trip to the Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. Players wrote into Nintendo, asking about the game. In issue number 6 of Nintendo Power, a reader asked if Nintendo would ever release Super Mario Bros. 3. The reply confirmed it was coming to PlayChoice 10, but that there are no immediate plans to release it for use with the NES. But in the Packwatch section in the back, where Nintendo teased future releases, Super Mario Bros. 3 was listed. By the summer of 1989, magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly and GamePro imported the game from Japan and wrote up extensive previews with screenshots. For many North American players, this was their first look at the game. But by July, a few people were playing Super Mario Bros. 3. On July 15th, 1989, Nintendo released the game for PlayChoice 10 arcade machines. A Nintendo of America executive called it the best we've ever produced for the system. Although there were far fewer PlayChoice 10s than Nintendo Entertainment Systems, word seemed to spread quickly. Operators reported earnings of PlayChoice 10 cabinets with Super Mario Bros. 3 had tripled. Meanwhile, in Nevada and California, Universal Pictures was shooting a film that would make Super Mario Bros. 3 the most anticipated video game of all time. In 1989, president of Universal Studios Tom Pollock was in a pickle. Their Jetsons movie wouldn't be ready in time for the holiday season. Pollock had to come up with an alternative, family-friendly movie. Throughout the year, he had witnessed the popularity explosion of Nintendo and thought a movie about video games would be a hit. So Pollock met with Nintendo marketing executives Bill White and Peter Main about a collaboration. His idea was a kid's version of the movie Tommy, a rock drama film about a disabled boy becoming a pinball champion. Nintendo couldn't have bought a better ad. In exchange for using their products in the movie, Nintendo received a licensing fee and approval over the script and game footage. Bill White frequented the film set to oversee production. All we were worried about was just making sure that the game footage was spectacular, he said. The movie was called The Wizard. It told the story of Jimmy, a quiet boy who is obsessed with getting to California. His half-brother, Corey, breaks him out of a mental institution to get him there. Along the way, they meet a girl named Haley. Corey and Haley soon discover that Jimmy is incredibly good at video games. They decide to enter Jimmy into the Video Armageddon tournament at Universal Studios and split the cash prize of $50,000. They set out for Los Angeles with their family and a bounty hunter at their heels. The movie was filled with Nintendo products, including games, the Nintendo Power line, and even the Power Glove. The Wizard was released on December 15th, 1989 in North America. It was panned by critics. Roger Ebert called it a thinly disguised commercial for Nintendo video games and the Universal Studio Tour. But that didn't matter to any kid who watched the movie. The biggest draw was near the end of the film, when the contestants in the Video Armageddon tournament played Super Mario Bros. 3.
Super Mario Bros. 3!
For the majority of viewers, this was the first time they saw actual gameplay footage of the latest Mario sequel. Nintendo's dominance in the video game market and its establishment in pop culture continued to grow, and there were no signs of slowing down. In 1989 alone, Nintendo grossed $2.7 billion in retail sales. The NES was, once again, the #1 toy for the third year in a row. The console was in 22% of US households, with 20 million units sold. The Game Boy, Nintendo's new handheld system released earlier that year, was selling out in stores. Merchandising exploded with more than 200 licensed Super Mario products. World of Nintendo departments popped up in stores around the country, dedicated to selling Nintendo products. Nintendo Power magazine grew to 1.8 million subscribers. The Nintendo Power line, where players could call in for game tips, received 140,000 calls a week. The excitement around Nintendo and Super Mario Bros. 3 reached a boiling point. Children asked for the game for Christmas, despite not knowing when it would be released. They didn't have to wait long. In January of 1990, Nintendo Power subscribers received a brand new issue. Inside was something they'd been waiting for. An official preview of Super Mario Bros. 3, along with a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the game. History had shown that a preview of a game in Nintendo Power meant the actual release was not far behind. The very next month, in February, Super Mario Bros. 3 popped up in stores across North America at a retail price of $49.95. There was a frenzy. Within 2 days, 250,000 units were gone, sold out everywhere. Nintendo couldn't make the game fast enough. Stores sold out within a day. Every other call we get is about Nintendo and Super Mario Bros. 3, said one Toys R Us employee in Chicago. We never know when we'll get it, but we'll sell out as soon as it gets here. But for anyone that managed to find a copy, it was easily one of the greatest games Nintendo had ever released.
If Super Mario Bros. 3 was a movie instead of a computer game, it would be up for an Oscar. Paul Franklin, The Courier News. Mario! Mario!
By March, 700,000 copies had been sold. Nintendo of America unleashed their $25 million advertising campaign. Commercials aired on TV. There were cross-promotions with other companies, including Popsicle and Nabisco. NBC aired a Saturday morning cartoon, The Adventures of Super Mario Bros. 3. McDonald's released a set of Happy Meal toys. Meanwhile, competitors released new consoles to the market. Sega had just launched their 16-bit Sega Genesis, and after the success of the PC Engine in Japan, NEC brought it over to North America as the TurboGrafx 16. But it didn't matter. Super Mario Bros. 3 was the talk of the schoolyard. Kids bragged about how far they could get in the game, or shared secrets about where to find warp whistles and new power-ups. The game was so big and so full of secrets, Nintendo worried it would overwhelm some players. So, in July of 1990, Nintendo Power put out their first full strategy guide, featuring Super Mario Bros. 3. It had maps of every level, information on every enemy and power-up. It revealed every secret in the game. Fans of all ages were obsessed with the game. One group of adult fans loved the game so much, they ported it to the PC and sent it to Nintendo, hoping to secure a license. Nintendo was impressed, but declined the offer. That didn't faze the team of John Carmack, John Romero, Tom Hall, and Adrian Carmack. They were excited about their work, and the following year, they formed a company, id Software, the makers of Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. By 1991, Nintendo sold more than 8 million copies of the game in North America, grossing more than $400 million. If Super Mario Bros. 3 were a business, it would have ranked in the top 10 U.S. toy companies of 1990. At the time, it was the best-selling standalone video game ever. Before Super Mario Bros. 3, critics questioned whether Nintendo was just a passing craze. Electronic Arts president Trip Hawkins compared the NES to Cabbage Patch Dolls. This is a toy, and that means it's a fad, he claimed. After Super Mario Bros. 3, there would be no more doubts. Nintendo reaped the rewards. Their estimated revenue for 1990 was $3.4 billion, which gave them a dominating 88% market share. In 1991, they surpassed Toyota as Japan's most successful company. Nintendo earned $1.5 million per employee. But it wasn't all roses. The Federal Trade Commission investigated Nintendo on allegations of antitrust violations, such as price fixing, in order to beat the competition. Nintendo denied any wrongdoing, but was ordered to send out up to $25 million worth of rebates to customers. The rebate took the form of a $5 coupon that consumers could only use to buy more Nintendo games. In total, Super Mario Bros. 3 sold more than 17 million copies worldwide. When combined with re-releases, it's estimated to have sold more than 30 million copies. But it was bigger than just money and sales figures. Super Mario Bros. 3 was further proof that home video games could be huge, sprawling adventures, and even better than arcade games. Shigeru Miyamoto became a superstar. Celebrities like Paul McCartney and Steven Spielberg flew to Japan to meet him. His success ensured he would either produce or direct all future big Nintendo releases. His next Mario game, Super Mario World, was a launch title for Nintendo's new 16-bit machine, the Super Famicom, also known as the Super Nintendo. With the updated hardware, Miyamoto was finally able to let his hero ride a dinosaur. Other companies took notice of Mario's success. Sega saw the power of a flagship franchise and began working on their own mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog. His debut in 1991 on the Mega Drive and Genesis created legit competition in the market, leading to the great console wars of the 90s. Even after Nintendo came out with the Super Nintendo, people continued to play and love Super Mario Bros. 3. It was listed in the top 20 NES games of Nintendo Power until the system was discontinued in 1995. When people look back on their childhood memories with the NES, they almost always, without fail, think of Super Mario Bros. 3. A game that felt nostalgic, yet revolutionary at the same time. A game that lived up to its unparalleled hype.
for Gaming Historian is provided in part by supporters on Patreon. Thank you.
In 2015, Retro Gamer magazine asked readers to list their top 10 video games for the magazine's 150 Greatest Games of All Time feature. Coming in at number 1 on almost 20% of all ballots was Super Mario World. It was a landslide victory, and for good reason. Super Mario World not only showed off the new bells and whistles of the Super Nintendo, it redefined what Super Mario games could be. The goal was no longer to get the high score and defeat Bowser. It was to explore an entirely new world, finding hidden paths and secret levels. Mario had an arsenal of new power-ups, moves, and friends. But above all, the game gave players more freedom than ever before. Super Mario World is widely considered the apex of 2D platforming. But it was a masterpiece made under challenging circumstances. For the first time, new competition threatened Nintendo's position in the video game market. The Super Mario World development team had to learn new hardware, the 16-bit Super Famicom, or Super Nintendo, and they had to learn it quickly in order for the game to launch with the new console. The result was the best Super Mario game yet, and arguably, ever. It helped ensure Nintendo stayed competitive in a new, more powerful era of video games. This is the story of Super Mario World.
It's about time for the Famicom to start dropping off. I think people are getting tired of it. Hiroshi Yamauchi.
In the summer of 1988, Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi made a stunning declaration. The Famicom era was coming to an end. Nintendo's Family Computer Console, or Famicom for short, was first released in Japan in July of 1983. By 1988, Nintendo had sold 12 million systems and untold millions of games, giving them a 90% share of the Japanese video game market. But Yamauchi had reason to be concerned. Sales of the Famicom had peaked in 1986 and were slowly dropping. In an exclusive interview with Japanese magazine Touch, Yamauchi expressed disappointment in the Famicom's recent sales numbers and admitted that the next generation of consoles had arrived. There was new competition in the video game market. In October of 1987, NEC, a massive electronics corporation, threw its hat in the ring with the PC Engine console. NEC boasted about the technological superiority of its system and planned to release a CD-ROM attachment in the future. The PC Engine appealed to teenagers and young adults. In just 2 months, NEC shipped more than 500,000 consoles. Nintendo was also keeping tabs on Sega. Sega was planning to launch their new console, the Mega Drive, in October of 1988. Sega boasted their new system would be capable of more than just playing video games. It would have a modem, a printer, and more. The Mega Drive was also the first 16-bit video game console. Sega proudly slapped a 16-bit label on their system. All of a sudden, Nintendo's 8-bit Famicom seemed underpowered and outdated. But Yamauchi had a surprise. In the interview with Touch magazine, he announced that Nintendo was shifting focus to their next-generation console, the the 16-bit Super Famicom. Yamauchi had been teasing the system since 1987, not coincidentally, a month before NEC released the PC Engine. Now, in 1988, Yamauchi was ready to reveal more details, not coincidentally, a month before Sega released the Mega Drive. The news was more than an announcement. It was a warning for potential buyers. Don't waste your money. Nintendo's latest console will be available soon. The Super Famicom was much more powerful than its predecessor. It had a custom 16-bit CPU, more memory, a custom Sony sound chip, more than 32,000 colors to choose from, a higher max resolution, stereo sound, and more. But Yamauchi believed looking at only the technical aspects of a console was naive. The strength of a video game system was in the software. And the Super Famicom, he boasted, would allow developers to make games they'd never thought possible. Yamauchi revealed that Nintendo was currently prototyping several games themselves, and one of them was Super Mario Bros. 4. It was a surprising announcement, mainly because Nintendo hadn't even released Super Mario Bros. 3. Over the past summer, Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto and his team within Nintendo's Entertainment Analysis and Development Group were wrapping up Super Mario Bros. 3. Nintendo planned to release the game in October of 1988. Miyamoto considered Super Mario Bros. 3 the definitive Mario game on the Famicom, and the true sequel to the original Super Mario Bros. It was 10 times the size of the first game, with 8 massive worlds containing 90 levels and an array of new power-ups. Super Mario Bros. 3 also utilized a multi-memory controller chip on the cartridge that pushed the Famicom hardware to its limits. By the end of development, Miyamoto's team was exhausted. He believed they, quote, put everything they had into it. But there was no time to rest. The higher-ups at Nintendo gave the team a new directive. Make Super Mario Bros. 4 for the Super Famicom, and have it ready by launch. Making Super Mario Bros. 4 a launch title was a no-brainer for Nintendo. Super Mario Bros. Was easily the most popular series on the Famicom and its international counterpart, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Making a new Super Mario game for Nintendo's new 16-bit console was a surefire way to sell hardware. But with new hardware to learn and a tight deadline, the team needed more resources. So, they grew in size, adding additional programmers, testers, and artists. They also brought back veterans. Of the 16-plus staff members assigned to Super Mario Bros. 4, 9 worked on Super Mario Bros. 3. Among them was Toshihiko Nakago. Nakago was a programmer from Systems Research and Development, or SRD, an independent development company with an office located conveniently inside Nintendo's Kyoto headquarters. Nakago served as the director of programming for Super Mario Bros. 4. Koji Kondo, who had written music for the series since its inception, returned to compose the music and sound effects. Hideki Kono and Katsuya Eguchi were once again in charge of maps and stage design. Then there was Shigeru Miyamoto. By 1988, Miyamoto was Nintendo's rockstar developer and chief software producer, and with the Super Famicom in development, his responsibilities increased dramatically. Along with consulting on the Super Famicom's console and controller design, Miyamoto had to work on 3 other upcoming games. So out of necessity, Miyamoto took a step back in his role as producer for Super Mario Bros. 4. He later recalled, basically, I stood by and watched closely, interjecting various ideas of my own here and there. And finally, Takashi Tezuka, an unsung hero of the Super Mario series, was put in charge of the Super Mario Bros. 4 project. Tezuka first joined Nintendo in 1984 as a designer, making instruction manuals and playing cards, but occasionally artists got teamed up with game designers to work on projects. And one day, Tezuka got paired up with Shigeru Miyamoto. The two formed a powerful partnership. Together, they designed and developed the first Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and more. During the development of Super Mario Bros. 3, Tezuka may have taken on too much work. Along with director duties, he also created character art and visuals for the game. Tezuka later admitted development didn't come together well. As a result, Nintendo delayed the release of Super Mario Bros. 3 by 6 months. Tezuka would not make the same mistake again. I didn't think it was good to take on too much, he said. As the director of Super Mario Bros. 4, Tezuka focused on managing his staff and helping with the game's overall design. He delegated visuals to a new member of the team, Shigefumi Hino. Hino was a relative newcomer to Nintendo. It was only his second year at the company, and he had only worked on one other game, a sequel to Famicom Grand Prix F1 Race, and it never got released. Now, Hino was assigned to arguably Nintendo's most important project. He felt a ton of pressure, saying, Super Mario Bros. 3 was really well made, so it was intimidating to know it would be compared to that. For that reason, I worried a lot over how we could present Super Mario in a fresh way. But luckily, the Super Mario Bros. 4 team had a much more powerful console to work with, the Super Famicom, and they were excited to try all the new bells and whistles. Head programmer Toshihiko Nakago was relieved he and his programmers no longer had to worry so much about hardware limitations, and Miyamoto thought it would be easier to create visuals with the new vast array of colors. The team also got some upgraded development tools. Up to that point, Mario levels were created by hand on graph paper, then transferred into a computer by programmers. Now the designers had software that allowed them to edit levels directly on the computer. Of course, there would be a learning curve with new tools and new hardware, so the Mario 4 team started with an experiment.
We ported Mario 3 to the Super Famicom as a hardware experiment, and even though the colors and sprites were more detailed, it was still the same game. It made me realize that we couldn't just make the same game again. We had to create something new. So it was in that context that we talked about how to make the most use of the new hardware. Shigeru Miyamoto.
By now, Nintendo had solidified the Super Mario Bros. Formula. Mario games were about athleticism, running fast, jumping high, dodging obstacles, and stomping enemies. They were about friendliness to new players. Anyone could pick up a Mario game, figure it out, and have fun. And finally, Super Mario Bros. Was about freedom. If players wanted to blaze through a level without collecting a single coin, they could do it. If players wanted to take their time, use power-ups, and explore levels, they could do that too. People could play Super Mario Bros. However they wanted. Tezuka and Miyamoto believed this new Mario game should not change what made the series so special. Instead, Nintendo could perfect the concepts, add fun new elements to the game, and show off the latest technologies in the Super Famicom. It would give players the most complete Super Mario experience yet. Meanwhile, on November 21st, 1988, Nintendo revealed a prototype of the Super Famicom at their Kyoto headquarters. Representatives from more than 200 companies, including TV press, magazines, and newspaper reporters, were on hand to see the unveiling. Nintendo announced they would ship the Super Famicom by July of 1989, an extremely ambitious deadline. Nintendo also showed some early game demos, but notably absent was Super Mario Bros. 4. The development team was still trying to solidify the game. Along the way, they made constant changes. Early on, the Super Mario Bros. 3 influence was apparent. The graphical style, including Mario's sprite, was very similar. Many enemies looked identical to their Super Mario Bros. 3 counterparts, and the Koopaling bosses still occupied the castles. They also brought back familiar power-ups, like the raccoon suit for flying, and the world maps looked strikingly similar, albeit much larger. It may have looked too similar. Co-workers frequently commented, it doesn't look all that different from the Famicom games. Tezuka took the criticism to heart and made some changes. Shigefumi Hino gave the sprites more detail. At one point, the team even experimented with a three-dimensional look, but they didn't stop there. Map director Hideki Kono also changed the world map considerably, clearly departing from the Mario 3 style. In addition to graphical upgrades, the Super Mario Bros. 4 team had to figure out how to show off the new features of the Super Famicom. The 16-bit console could do all sorts of neat tricks, like background scaling and rotation, transparency effects. And as a launch title, Nintendo wanted Super Mario Bros. 4 to show off the new hardware. But Miyamoto was hesitant to throw in new things just for the sake of it. He said, "Just because we found something cool the hardware could do, something that made us go, whoa, if it ruined the balance or flow of the game, we didn't want to include it." The development team thoughtfully added new elements. Large sprites emphasized the Super in Super Famicom. Transparency effects in the water and on enemies immersed the player into the game. Scrolling backgrounds gave levels a sense of depth. Rotating platforms gave Mario new, challenging boss fights. In addition to the technological upgrades, the Super Mario Bros. 4 team also honed in on the core game design. Luckily, they had a wealth of player feedback at their disposal. On October 23, 1988, after 2.5 years in development, Super Mario Bros. 3 finally hit Japanese store shelves. The game received rave reviews and was the best-selling Famicom game for months. But Super Mario Bros. 3 wasn't the most friendly to new players. Miyamoto wanted to find a better balance with Super Mario Bros. 4. As a launch title, the game needed to appeal to players of all skill levels. So the team implemented a few features to make the game a bit easier. They added checkpoints to levels that made Mario big if he was small. In addition, the team added an item reserve box. In the previous game, Mario could stockpile power-ups and use them before entering levels. Now, Mario could bring extra power-ups into the level. If he got hit, or if players pressed select, the item would drop down automatically. By the summer of 1989, Super Mario Bros. 4 was starting to separate itself from the previous games, and the development team took it a step further by giving the game a new title. With a whole new world for Mario to explore, there could be no better name: Super Mario World. But everything changed when, not surprisingly, Nintendo decided to delay the release of the Super Famicom. There were a multitude of reasons. The Super Famicom hardware was, for the most part, ready to go. But there was a distinct lack of software. Nintendo was still working on launch titles, and although 21 companies had signed on to become third-party developers for the system, none of them had development kits yet. There was also a global chip shortage. A new generation of semiconductor and chip technology caused manufacturers to split their production capacity. That drove prices up considerably. Yamauchi hoped to keep the Super Famicom at a price point of around 20,000 yen, or around $150. However, with the chip shortage, the cost of the Super Famicom could shoot up beyond 30,000 yen, or around $225. And with the chip shortage, Nintendo maxed out its manufacturing capacity. At that time, Nintendo produced 3 million Famicoms and Nintendo Entertainment Systems per month. They were also dealing with stock shortages of their new handheld system, the Game Boy. Nintendo planned to launch the Game Boy in North America later that year. The stock shortages led one columnist to comment, "Why launch a competing product when you cannot cope with what you already have?" There was also still life left in the 8-bit Famicom. Super Mario Bros. 3 was a huge success, and NX's upcoming Dragon Quest IV was guaranteed to fly off store shelves. It was so popular that NX planned to release the game on the weekend, to prevent kids from skipping school to buy it. Yamauchi's early teasing of the Super Famicom seemed to have worked. In a Famitsu magazine survey, many readers claimed they would rather wait for the Super Famicom than buy a PC Engine. Although NEC's PC Engine was selling well, it was still nowhere near the reach of the Famicom, which was now in 1/3 of Japanese households. And Sega's 16-bit Mega Drive failed to make much of an impact. They had only sold 400,000 units up to that point. With the threat of competition dying down, there was simply no need to rush the Super Famicom's launch. So on July 28, 1989, Nintendo held a press conference at their Kyoto headquarters and announced they were delaying the Super Famicom for an entire year. But while the delay made headlines, there was more to share. Nintendo unveiled a new design of the Super Famicom, and for the first time, they previewed their most anticipated game, Super Mario World. But surprisingly, the reaction was mixed. While many publications were impressed by the technological advancements, they felt somewhat disappointed in the gameplay and graphics. Famitsu magazine commented that it looks to be the same as the previous Mario game. And Electronic Gaming Monthly, a US publication getting early scoops on games from Japan, stated Super Mario World was not as graphically impressive as Nintendo's other upcoming games. But this would not deter Takashi Tezuka, Shigeru Miyamoto, and the rest of the Super Mario World team. The delay of the Super Famicom turned out to be a blessing in disguise. With another year of development at their disposal, there was plenty more to add that would turn Super Mario World into one of the greatest platformers of all time. With the Super Famicom delayed until the fall of 1990, the Super Mario World team had an extra year to work on the game. For Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, it was a chance to refine the game's balance. How could the development team ensure both newcomers and veterans got the most out of Super Mario? And how could they give these players more freedom to play the game in their own way? The team often met late into the night, discussing potential ideas. But one idea unearthed a wealth of possibilities.
I think great video games are like favorite playgrounds, places you become attached to and go back to again and again. Wouldn't it be great to have a whole drawer full of playgrounds right at your fingertips? Shigeru Miyamoto.
Miyamoto and Tezuka found their playground with the world map. Nintendo first introduced a world map to the Super Mario series with Super Mario Bros. 3. It allowed players to choose what levels they wanted to play to reach the end. However, it was still a fairly linear experience to get to Bowser and save the princess. The development team initially carried this concept over to Super Mario World, but besides some updated visuals, it was functionally the same. But what if the world map was more than just a map? Miyamoto said, "We were thinking that players should be able to play with the map itself." So the map got a complete overhaul. Mario had a whole new world to explore, Dinosaur Land, and players were free to explore Dinosaur Land how they wished. Rather than having 8 separate worlds, Dinosaur Land was one massive area with interconnecting regions. Players could backtrack and replay levels, or explore new areas of the map. The development team filled the map with secret levels and hidden paths. This gave players new ways to experience the game. For example, players could find a secret passage to Bowser's castle quickly, or take their time and play through all the levels in order. And beating Bowser was no longer the end of the game. There were 96 exits players could find throughout Dinosaur Land's 74 levels. Sometimes Mario found a secret pipe that led to a new exit. Other times, a key opened up a new pathway on the map. Players might find an area that they previously thought was unreachable. The development team provided clues to help the player find these secret exits. For example, levels that flashed red had multiple exits. Visual clues, like a notch on the cliffside or a pipe off the beaten path, might mean a nearby secret. And thanks to a save battery on the cartridge, players could take their time to find all the exits. A number on the main menu let players know their progress. But the changes to the world map were not just about levels and secrets, they also brought balance to the game. For many games, developers would add an easy mode or hard mode to the main menu to change the difficulty. But Miyamoto was not a fan of this design choice. Instead, he wanted players to adjust the difficulty as they played. So the director of programming, Toshihiko Nakago, came up with an idea: dotted line blocks. The idea started from a simple addition. The team wanted to try new block types and levels. From there, it evolved into much more. Throughout levels, players came across various colored dotted lines. When the player found the corresponding switch palace on the map, the blocks activated. It made levels easier by providing a new platform for Mario to jump on, or providing power-ups. If players wanted to make the game harder, they could ignore the switch palaces. Dinosaur Land now resembled a board game. There were 9 unique areas to explore, like Forest of Illusion, Twin Bridges, and Star World. And many regions were named after food, like Donut Plains, Vanilla Dome, and Chocolate Island. With a new map and unique regions for Mario to explore, character designer Shigefumi Hino saw an opportunity to update many of the game's visuals. Mario got a makeover with back pockets on his overalls, an emblem on his hat, and improved shadows. Miyamoto specifically requested Mario have light in his eyes. Hino complied with the request, but left Mario with tiny black eyes when he was small. He thought it gave Mario more character. Hino also added small details. Mario flashed a peace sign when he finished a level. When Mario lost a life, a look of horror swept over his face. But Hino didn't stop with Mario. Many classic enemies, including Goombas, Lakitus, and Drybones, got a new look. Koopa Troopas changed significantly. Previously, Koopa Troopas acted like turtles, slowly moving around levels. Now, Koopa Troopas walked upright. Mario could bounce them out of their shell, revealing a vulnerable little reptile in its underwear. Some would even try to recover their shells, or kick them at Mario. Along with classic enemies, Hino and Tezuka came up with new ones. Among them was Wiggler, a volatile caterpillar. Chargin' Chuck, a football-playing Koopa that took 3 hits to take down. And Rip Van Fish, a sleepy fish who excitedly chased Mario when he woke up. And what was Dinosaur Land without a few dinosaurs? There was Rex, who required 2 stomps to take down. Dino Rhino, a large nearsighted enemy who turned into a dino torch if you stomped on him. Reznor, a fire-breathing triceratops that guarded several fortresses. And Blarg, a massive dinosaur who lurked beneath the lava, waiting for Mario to pass by. But not every dinosaur was an enemy. In fact, one new friend would forever change the Super Mario series. For the past 5 years, Shigeru Miyamoto had a sketch of Mario riding a dinosaur taped up at his desk. He had wanted to implement the idea since the first Super Mario Bros. Game. The team tried to add it to Super Mario Bros. 3, but technical limitations prevented them. But with the more powerful 16-bit Super Famicom, there was hope. Tezuka noticed the sketch again and decided to give it a shot. He took the idea to character designer Shigefumi Hino and asked him to draw a dinosaur that Mario could ride like a horse. Hino's first idea came out looking like a crocodile. Tezuka made some suggestions. The dinosaur should be smaller, cuter, and related to the Koopa Troopas. Hino made modifications, and, over time, the character's final form took shape. A green dinosaur with a shell on its back that doubled as a saddle. Tezuka recalled that, quote, he turned into quite the cute character. As a placeholder, they named the character Yoshi, a nickname of Mie Yoshimura, an artist on staff. But the name stuck. Writing Yoshi was a fun new way to explore levels because
What's
he
up,
offered
Yoshi, you
more
little
than
bitch?
just transportation. Yoshi could eat enemies or grab hard-to-reach items, help Mario jump extra high, and traverse rough terrain. Yoshi could also gain new powers. For example, with the different colored Koopa shells, Yoshi could breathe fire, temporarily fly, or stomp the ground. In addition, he could eat berries scattered around levels to earn more time, power-ups, and coins. Yoshi also provided Mario with a free hit. When an enemy hit Mario, Yoshi would run away, but the player had an opportunity to get Yoshi back. The team also added adorable baby Yoshis in various colors. Mario could feed the Yoshi's enemies to make them grow up, and each colored Yoshi had specific traits when they gobbled up Koopa shells. Essentially, Yoshi was a new, robust power-up for Mario to use on his journey. The development team brought back old power-ups as well. There were the usuals, the Super Mushroom to make Mario big, the Fire Flower that let Mario shoot fireballs, and a Superstar that granted temporary invincibility. The development team initially brought back the Super Leaf, which turned Mario into a raccoon and allowed him to fly temporarily. But with all the other changes happening, they thought they could do better. So they experimented with a few ideas, such as wings, before finally settling on a cape. The cape, acquired by picking up a feather, worked similarly to the raccoon suit. Players could hit enemies with it and, after a brief runoff, could temporarily fly. But it offered so much more. Players had more control mid-flight, and by rocking back and forth, they could stay in the air much longer. Mario could also attack enemies from above. It was the most intricate power-up in the series thus far. The development team constantly tinkered with the cape controls. Many test players found it too difficult at first. And thanks to the extra buttons available on the Super Famicom controller, Mario also had a new move, the spin jump. By pressing the A button, Mario could destroy blocks from above, bounce off obstacles, and stomp enemies. The development team even utilized the shoulder L and R buttons on the new controller. It allowed the player to scroll the screen forward or backward slightly. In previous Super Mario games, certain levels required players to take a blind leap of faith. Now, players could scout out what was ahead before making a decision. Super Mario World was finally coming into its own. The development team overhauled almost everything. A new world, new enemies, new friends, new minigames, and new power-ups. And to complement everything were the brilliant compositions and sound effects from composer Koji Kondo. Since the beginning, Kondo had worked on the Super Mario Bros. Series, composing the memorable original theme. While working on Super Mario Bros. 3, he composed a plethora of new music with a distinct reggae vibe and a ton of percussion. But after completing the project, Kondo thought he may have composed too much music. As a result, he felt like each song made less of an impact. Kondo's favorite songs were ones with beautiful melodies. He felt they left a more profound impression on people. So, with Super Mario World, he wanted to focus on one melody and incorporate it into multiple songs. But due to the new hardware, he found the work, quote, 100 times more difficult. Kondo had to make all the sound samples himself and learn new software tools. But he quickly realized the Super Famicom allowed him to do so much more with the music. The 8-bit Famicom only had 5 audio channels and was limited to electronic sounds. But the Super Famicom had 8 dedicated sound channels and supported samples and sound effects from all kinds of instruments. As a result, Kondo got to completely rethink what game music could be. Kondo used a variety of instruments for both the music and sound effects. It resulted in a rich, warm sound, unlike anything players had ever heard before in a Super Mario game. Players heard Kondo's catchy melody throughout the game. The above-ground music made the melody sound bright and fun. In contrast, the Fortress music gave the melody a sinister, mysterious vibe. Kondo added a few subtle musical cues too. When Mario found Yoshi, a new percussion track kicked in over top the music. Kondo Nintendo even added a reverb effect to the sounds while Mario was underground, adding to the level's atmosphere. And with the additional memory in the Super Famicom, Kondo was able to compose a title song for the game, a first for the Super Mario series. By the summer of 1990, 2 years after development started, Super Mario World was mostly complete. Tezuka and his team felt they had taken the concepts that made the series so special: freedom, athleticism, friendliness, and perfected them. It was a massive, side-scrolling 2D platformer. Nintendo packed everything into a 4 megabit cartridge, an impressive feat considering all the new graphics and sound. On the game's packaging, Nintendo added Super Mario Bros. 4 as a subtitle, reminding players that this was a continuation of the beloved series from the Famicom. Super Mario World was the quintessential launch title. It showcased the hardware's new technologies, while at the same time providing fans of the series comfort and familiarity. In many ways, it embodied the Super Famicom. The primary colors of the console, red, green, blue, and yellow, were found throughout the game. In Koopa shells, Yoshis, and even on the game's box art. Shigefumi Hino, who had been nervous even to start development, felt that they had perfected the genre. I felt like, with Super Mario World, we had done everything we could with a side-scrolling jumping game, he said. With development finished, all that was left was for Nintendo to release the Super Famicom. Ever since Nintendo announced the delay of the system a year earlier, the company had been mostly silent. But on June 21st, 1990, they finally had an update. The Super Famicom was coming out on November 21st, 1990. On August 28th and 29th, Nintendo held a Shoshinkai trade show at the Harumi International Exhibition Center in Tokyo. There were now 33 developers making games for the Super Famicom. Many of the companies were at the show to demonstrate their upcoming games. But all eyes were on Nintendo. For the first time, they premiered the final version of the Super Famicom. The system would cost 25,000 yen, or around $170, and come with 2 controllers. To keep the price down, Nintendo didn't include any cables or power adapters. Nintendo also premiered their 2 launch titles. The first was F-Zero, an ultra-fast arcade racing game. It showcased one of the Super Famicom's new technologies, Mode 7, which gave a faux 3D effect. The second game was Super Mario World. Nintendo set up 10 Super Famicom stations at the trade show, so attendees could try out the new games. 8 of them were dedicated to Super Mario World. People packed the booth for the entire show. The media was impressed by all the latest changes to the game. Electronic Gaming Monthly called it the premier piece of software shipping with the Super Famicom. The hype for Super Mario World and the Super Famicom was bigger than ever. Nintendo received 1.5 million pre-orders for their new console from wholesalers. With so many pre-orders, Nintendo worried that launch day might be a little chaotic. So they encouraged retailers to implement a reservation system when selling the Super Famicom. One store had so many reservation requests, they held a lottery and sent out postcards to the winners. 2 years after announcing the system, Nintendo was finally ready to enter the next generation. And for the first time, they were launching a new console with real competition in the market. In the early morning of November 20th, Nintendo loaded 100 trucks with boxes of Super Famicom consoles, along with F-Zero and Super Mario World cartridges. In an event dubbed Operation Midnight Shipping, Nintendo sent out their newest console and games in the dead of night, hoping to ward off thieves. And on the morning of November 21st, 1990, the Super Famicom and Super Mario World were officially on store shelves in Japan. Launch day was a mixed bag. The Hakuhinkan Toy Park store, which didn't take reservations, had a massive line outside the entrance. The store sold Super Famicoms on a first-come, first-served basis. As a result, many customers left without a console. But other stores, like the Odakyu department store, were relatively calm. The store issued reservation tickets 6 weeks ahead of time, anticipating that kids would play hooky to get the system. The store sold 1,500 Super Famicoms on launch day. But the biggest issue was the lack of stock. Although Nintendo had 1.5 million pre-orders, they could only ship 300,000 consoles. Many smaller stores, particularly mom-and-pop shops, didn't receive any consoles. Some stores took advantage of the shortage by offering the Super Famicom bundled with software at a marked-up price. Retailers accused Nintendo of stalling production to create a false shortage and drive up demand. Nintendo responded by promising to increase their manufacturing capacity in 1991. Despite the issues, the Super Famicom was a hit. According to a report from Nintendo, the initial stock of 300,000 consoles sold out in just 3 days. And Super Mario World was the crown jewel of the system.
To put it simply, it's everything a game should be. Challenging, frustrating, rewarding, and most important of all, unbelievably addictive. I'm still nursing an injured finger from a weekend solid, and I mean solid, play. If you've got a Super Famicom, this is as essential as the power supply. Julian Jazz Rignall, Mean Machines.
Super Mario World received rave reviews from the press. Famitsu magazine gave the game a score of 34 out of 40. They wrote, "The Mario series repeatedly powers up, and this may surprise some players, but I felt a lot of power in this entry. It feels like it has 3 times the ideas without impacting any of the fundamentals that make Mario games so much fun." But even with all the praise, some reviewers came away slightly disappointed. They expected more from Nintendo's new 16-bit console. One reviewer considered the game a bit stale compared to Super Mario Bros. 3. Others found the extra controls challenging to learn. None of that stopped customers from scooping up Super Mario World. Many people bought the game even without owning a Super Famicom. By February of 1991, Nintendo had sold 750,000 copies of Super Mario World, despite only selling 600,000 Super Famicom consoles. Super Mario Mania, once again, swept over Japan. A new wave of Super Mario merchandise, including plushies and toys, hit store shelves. Bandai released Super Mario World, Mario and Yoshi's Adventure Land, an interactive anime compatible with Bandai's Tedabiko toy phone. There were cross-promotions with food and beverage companies, including McDonald's. There were mangas based on the game, such as the Super Mario Kun series. Nintendo and Warner Pioneer released the game's soundtrack on CD, featuring new jazz arrangements of Koji Kondo's music. Konami even released a gambling machine, Mario Roulette, based on the minigame in Super Mario World. The Super Famicom and Super Mario World were a success. Nintendo hit its goal of selling 3 million consoles within a year by August of 1991, 3 months ahead of time. And in total, Nintendo would sell 3.5 million copies of Super Mario World in Japan, making it the second best-selling game on the Super Famicom. By 1992, the Super Famicom overtook NEC's PC Engine in sales, cementing Nintendo as the top dog in the Japanese video game market. But when it came time to bring the Super Famicom and Super Mario World over to North America, things wouldn't be so easy. When Nintendo first revealed the Super Famicom in November of 1988, sales of the 8-bit Famicom were declining. But its North American counterpart, the Nintendo Entertainment System, was setting sales records. In 1988, Nintendo of America sold 7 million NES consoles, and more more than 40 million games. For the second year in a row, the NES was the #1 toy in the United States. The country had Nintendo fever.
If you haven't heard about the Nintendo Entertainment System, odds are you either just awakened from a 2-year sleep or you don't have a child under the age of 14. Nintendo is simply the toy of the late 80s, a marketing phenomenon every bit as remarkable as the Cabbage Patch Kids craze a few years back. Dennis Lynch, Chicago Tribune.
1989 looked to be another banner year for Nintendo of America. But just like in Japan, there would be new contenders in the market. At the 1989 Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, Sega introduced the Genesis, the North American version of the Mega Drive. NEC brought the PC Engine over as the TurboGrafx-16. And the hot buzzword of the show was bits. To the general public, more bits meant better video games. The TurboGrafx-16 was technically an 8-bit console, but sported dual 16-bit graphics chips, and NEC marketed the console as a 16-bit system. Sega boasted that the Genesis was the only true 16-bit system, and promised arcade-quality graphics, stereo sound, and unsurpassed gameplay. With NEC and Sega bringing in more powerful consoles, it begged the question, where was Nintendo's 16-bit system? Officially, Nintendo said it had no plans to launch a 16-bit console in North America. During their presentation at the Summer CES show, Nintendo played a video hosted by a costumed Mario that showcased the NES and Game Boy. Mario tried to convince the audience that 16-bit consoles were not the future of video games, and that the NES was plenty powerful. The press called it propaganda. But while Nintendo of America feigned disinterest in 16 bits, video game magazines were picking up news on the Super Famicom from Japan. Video game magazines had seen a resurgence in the past year, thanks to a booming video game industry. Nintendo even had a magazine, Nintendo Power, with an estimated 1.2 million subscribers. Nintendo carefully chose what to cover and what to keep up its sleeve, and it wanted to keep the Super Famicom up its sleeve. But other magazines didn't have those restrictions, and regularly looked to Japan for the latest video game news and rumors. There was GamePro, video games and computer entertainment, and Game Players. But by far, the magazine with the most coverage of Japan was Electronic Gaming Monthly, or EGM. In their very first issue from May of 1989, the magazine revealed the Super Famicom, calling it the most incredible game system ever seen. In their second issue, EGM had full-color photos of the Super Famicom prototype, along with the first mention of a new Super Mario game, Super Mario Bros. 4. It couldn't have made Nintendo happy. Super Mario Bros. 2 hadn't even been out for a year in North America, and Nintendo was spending 1989 hyping up Super Mario Bros. 3, due to come out in early 1990. By the fall of 1989, Nintendo of America could no longer deny that a 16-bit machine was in the works. Vice President of Marketing Peter Main confirmed the Super Famicom was real and coming to Japan, but he stopped short of announcing a North American release. Instead, Main affirmed that the company wanted to wring every last megabyte of power from the Nintendo Entertainment System before jumping into the 16-bit generation. In other words, any announcement of a new 16-bit system would cut into Nintendo of America's sales. But that didn't stop the press from talking about the Super Famicom and Super Mario Bros. 4. Electronic Gaming Monthly repeatedly brought over the latest news from Japan. In issue 4, they confirmed Super Mario Bros. 4 was now called Super Mario World, and showed the game's first screenshots. Despite the whisperings of a 16-bit console, Nintendo of America had another record year in 1989. They sold an astonishing 9 million NES consoles. For the third year in a row, the NES was the #1 selling toy. In addition, Nintendo's new Game Boy handheld, introduced in August of 1989, sold around 1 million units in less than 6 months. And despite the new competition, Nintendo still controlled about 80% of the $4 billion video game market. And 1990 looked like another big year. Nintendo of America was preparing to launch their highly anticipated new game, Super Mario Bros. 3. The company spent the past year hyping up the game with teasers and early releases on the PlayChoice 10 arcade cabinet. The game was even in a Hollywood film, The Wizard. In January of 1990, Nintendo Power had an article about the making of Super Mario Bros. 3, featuring a write-up on Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto. The article briefly mentioned that Miyamoto was working on games for the Super Famicom, including Super Mario Bros. 4. But that wasn't all. In the mailbag section, a reader noted he read about the Super Famicom in other magazines and wondered why Nintendo Power had not talked about it more. The magazine replied that the Super Famicom wasn't even out in Japan. They only wanted to provide information that was, quote, timely and accurate. Nintendo Power now had a subscriber base of almost 2 million. This was their first acknowledgement of the Super Famicom and Super Mario World. With the hype of Super Mario Bros. 3 dying down, a new hype emerged for Nintendo's next console and Super Mario game. And those other magazines kept the hype train moving. Rumors swirled about what the Super Famicom would look like in North America, and when exactly it was coming. One rumor suggested that the Super Famicom was actually a more powerful 32-bit system. Another report claimed that Nintendo planned to call the new system SFX in North America. There was even gossip that the Super Famicom would come to North America as an attachment to the NES. By the fall of 1990, it seemed like Nintendo was tired of the rumors and speculation. In September, Nintendo Power published a blurb on the unveiling of the Super Famicom in Japan, along with screenshots of Super Mario World. They also took a jab at other publications, asking readers to stick with Nintendo Power for, quote, hard facts and not wimpy rumors. But Electronic Gaming Monthly also covered the unveiling of the Super Famicom in Japan, and much more extensively. Their November issue had a multi-page preview of the console, Super Mario World, and other upcoming games. Still, with all the previews, rumors, and speculation, no one outside of Nintendo knew when the Super Famicom and Super Mario World were coming stateside. But 1990 proved to be a defining year for Nintendo of America. The company had another record-breaking year, with $3.4 billion in sales. Nintendo now controlled 87% of the video game market. Super Mario Bros. 3 was a colossal hit, selling 7.5 million copies and grossing more than $400 million. At the time, it was the best-selling standalone video game ever. Nintendo also sold 3.2 million Game Boys, along with 9 million games. But despite all the accolades, Nintendo also saw problems. The Nintendo Entertainment System was saturating the market. 1 in 4 households owned an NES, and in homes with children aged 10 to 14, almost 100% owned an NES. For the first time in North America, NES sales declined, down to 7.2 million units, and the company's projections for 1991 were even lower. Nintendo estimated they would only sell 4.5 million NES systems. There was also the threat of competitors, particularly Sega. Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi once stated that Sega was not a legitimate contender in the US market. But that had changed. By the end of 1990, Sega had sold around 1.5 million Genesis consoles and had an 80% share of the 16-bit market. The company expected to sell even more consoles in 1991. The public was ready for the next generation. According to Sega, 60% of Genesis owners were Nintendo fans who traded up. A Rand Youth poll revealed that one of the most requested items on a teenage boy's wish list was a new video game system, despite 90% of the participants already owning the system.
The venerable NES is finally showing its age. Compared with its competition, the NES offers inferior sound and fuzzy graphics. In Japan, buyers are being treated to Nintendo's Super Famicom, an awesome new game machine, but no plans have been made for the US debut of this system. Come on, Nintendo, how about equal rights for American buyers? Dennis Lynch, Chicago Tribune.
Nintendo of America saw the writing on the wall. It was time to enter the 16-bit generation. In January of 1991, less than 2 months after the Super Famicom hit stores in Japan, Nintendo of America officially confirmed that the Super Famicom was coming to North America. At the 1991 Winter Consumer Electronics Show, attendees waited in line for 20 minutes to see a demonstration of the system. Nintendo showed previews of a few games, including Pilot Wings and F-Zero. But the biggest hit was Super Mario World. One reporter said it looked like, quote, the best Mario game yet. Nintendo of America's Peter Main predicted the Super Famicom would go on sale in the United States by the second half of 1991. Nintendo wanted to have more software available before launching. To entice developers and compete with Sega, Nintendo removed their exclusivity agreement. The Super Famicom would have a new design and, eventually, a new name in North America: the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Nintendo predicted it would sell 2 million consoles by the end of 1991. But selling the 16-bit system would be much more challenging in the United States than in Japan. In Japan, the economy was booming. Nintendo was selling Super Famicoms faster than they could make them. And this was despite a shrinking consumer base. Since the mid-1970s, Japan's birth rate had declined, and the average family had 1.5 children. The result? As one analyst explained, fewer children are surrounded by more rich adults, and that means that the money spent on each child increases. But in the United States, the situation was much different. The country was in the tail end of a recession. War in the Middle East more than doubled oil prices. The failure of many savings and loan institutions hit the lending market hard. More than 1.8 million people were added to unemployment. Because of this, consumers were spending less and saving money wherever possible. So when Nintendo announced a $200 video game system that was not compatible with NES games, many parents were outraged. In the United States, the average family spent $225 on toys per child. Almost all of it would have to go to the Super Nintendo. When a reporter asked a mother of 3 if she was going to buy a Super Nintendo for her kids, she exclaimed, "No way. We're not shoving the old Nintendo in the closet. I've got $700 invested in that baby." A father from California called it immoral. The press jumped on the controversy, claiming the Super Nintendo would make the Nintendo Entertainment System obsolete. Nintendo had to do some serious damage control. They argued that adding backward compatibility would make the Super Nintendo even more expensive. They also insisted they were not abandoning the Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES, they claimed, was an entry-level system for people not wanting the latest graphics, sound, or challenge. It was a cassette tape, and the Super Nintendo was a CD. A console for the veteran player who had gotten their full enjoyment out of the NES. But it wasn't just the Super Nintendo. Parents blamed Nintendo for their child's lower school grades and eye strain, and claimed the games were too violent. Nintendo was also accused of monopolizing the industry. The company had been hit with multiple antitrust lawsuits, and for the past year, the FTC had investigated Nintendo over antitrust violations such as price fixing. Nintendo denied any wrongdoing, but settled the case and agreed to send out up to $25 million worth of rebates to customers. The rebate took the form of a $5 coupon that consumers could only use to buy more Nintendo games. But industry insiders were skeptical that people would ditch Nintendo completely. As one writer put it, Nintendo may have a tough time, but kids still tend to get what they want. That was true. Some kids couldn't wait and had already imported the Super Famicom from Japan. Plus, Nintendo had arguably the biggest weapon of all, Super Mario. Super Mario Bros. 3's success catapulted Mario into another stratosphere. According to his Q-score, a measurement of popularity among brands and celebrities, Mario was now more popular among children than Mickey Mouse. There were more than 300 licensed Mario products in the United States, worth $200 million in annual sales. There was a Saturday morning cartoon, a breakfast cereal, and even a planned feature film, with rumors that Danny DeVito would play the leading role. If anything could help convince consumers to pick up a new console, it was a Super Mario game. Back in 1986, when Nintendo launched the NES nationwide, they released a version bundled with Super Mario Bros. It played a significant role in driving sales. It seemed like a no-brainer to do it again for the Super Nintendo. On June 1st, 1991, Nintendo officially unveiled the newly designed Super Nintendo Entertainment System at the summer CES show in Chicago.
The big guy in the home video game market has finally caught up with the pack. You're looking at Nintendo's much-awaited 16-bit home system, the Super NES. It's a big step forward for Nintendo fans. Better sound, better graphics, and much more sophisticated play.
This is positioned for the true heavy user who wants that next level of play experience, not for everybody.
Nintendo set up multiple Super Nintendo stations at their booth, where attendees could try out Mario's latest adventure and other upcoming titles. The system was scheduled to launch on September 9th, 1991, come bundled with the latest Mario game, Super Mario World. But while Nintendo touted the Super Nintendo and Super Mario World, their competitor, Sega, had an ace up their sleeve, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sega came up with the character to compete against the Super Mario juggernaut. The company first announced their speedy new video game back at the Winter CES show and was ready to launch the game to retail stores. Sonic the Hedgehog received high praise from the press. Video games and computer entertainment declared, "At last, Sega has their own Mario." And Sega had one more surprise in store. The Sega Genesis was getting a price cut, down to $150, and would come bundled with Sonic the Hedgehog. The company knew the battle between Sonic and Mario would be critical in the 16-bit market, and Sega was not going to play around. They now controlled 90% of the 16-bit market and had a 2-year head start on Nintendo. Sega president Tom Kalinske shrugged off the Super Nintendo, claiming Nintendo would have to play catch-up with Sega. While Nintendo hoped to have around 18 games by Christmas, Sega would have more than 100, and for the second half of 1991, Sega had a $15 million advertising budget. After Sega announced their new Sonic the Hedgehog console bundle, sales surged. For the first time, Nintendo of America had legitimate competition in the video game market, but they hoped Super Mario could save the day. On Wednesday, August 21st, 1991, a Toys R Us store in Cerritos, California opened a shipment box from Nintendo. Inside was their new 16-bit console, the Super Nintendo. The system arrived almost 3 weeks ahead of time. Over the next few days, stores around the country started receiving shipments. Soon, the word got out. The Super Nintendo was here. The Super Nintendo launched with F-Zero, Pilot Wings, and the bundled game, Super Mario World. Praise for Mario's latest adventure poured in, from magazines, newspapers, and school playgrounds. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave the game a score of 36 out of 40, calling it easily the best Mario adventure yet. And Video Games and Computer Entertainment called it by far the best installment in the Mario saga. But some critics expected more from Super Mario World. Entertainment Weekly claimed Nintendo was beating a dead Koopa, and that Mario was doing, quote, all the things he's been doing for the past 5 years. But it didn't seem to bother anyone else who played Super Mario World. It was Mario at his finest. Nintendo backed the Super Nintendo launch with a massive $25 million advertising blitz. The September 1991 issue of Nintendo Power made its way to 2 million mailboxes across the country, with Super Mario World featured on the cover. Inside was a 16-page guide featuring maps, items, enemies, tips, and more. Nintendo invaded televisions as well. There were commercials with a jazzy new slogan, "Now you're playing with power, Super Power." And NBC aired a new Super Mario World cartoon on Saturday mornings. Super Mario World and the Super Nintendo even made their way into grocery stores. There were cross-promotions with Pepsi, Kool-Aid, Shasta Soda, and Kraft Mac and Cheese. Nintendo also released Mario Mania, a 150-plus page guide all about Nintendo's hero, including a Super Mario World strategy guide. By October, Nintendo sold more than 500,000 Super Nintendo consoles and was on track to sell 2 million by the end of the year. But the demand for the Super Nintendo was not as high as it was in Japan. Some stores sold out quickly. A manager at Electronics Boutique in Greenville, South Carolina commented, "If we got 50 in tomorrow, we'd have 50 sold." But in other areas, the Super Nintendo was easy to find. One reporter in Detroit called 8 local Toys R Us stores, and all 8 had the system in stock. Nintendo could blame Sega for the lack of Super Nintendo craze. The Genesis was cheaper, had more games, and offered backward compatibility with Master System games via an adapter. And Sega was more than willing to pit Sonic against Mario. Their commercials featured the games side by side. The message was simple. Mario is old and slow. Sonic is fast and cool. Sega also launched the Sega World Tour, traveling to shopping malls around the country to let people try Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Mario World. According to Sega, 88% of the participants preferred Sonic.
House-to-house fighting continues unabated. War drums beat along the shores of Lake Michigan and bugles blare west of the Rockies. The martial music of the Silicon Samurais harks from the east. The question is no longer if there will be a video game war, but rather who will win it. Arnie Katz. Video games and computer entertainment.
The launch of the Super Nintendo and Super Mario World officially signaled the beginning of one of the greatest battles in video game history, the console wars. Sega and Nintendo duked it out for control of the 1991 holiday season. In the end, both companies claimed victory. Nintendo claimed it sold 2.1 million Super Nintendo units. Sega disputed the figure, claiming it was closer to 1.4 million. Meanwhile, Sega claimed it sold every system it could make in 1991, 1.6 million units. Nintendo argued it was closer to 1 million units. Nintendo knew they were in for a long war, so in January, they slashed the price of the Super Nintendo to $180. By the summer, Nintendo cut the price again, to $150. That same year, Nintendo expanded their 16-bit territory by launching the Super Nintendo in Australia and Europe, bundled with Super Mario World. The game once again received glowing reviews. The fight between Sega and Nintendo would drag on for years. Both companies attempted to one-up each other with new and exciting games, hardware attachments, and peripherals. Children would argue on playgrounds and in classrooms, and declare their allegiance to Sega or Nintendo. For Nintendo, Super Mario World remained a key weapon in the console wars. It was bundled with the Super Nintendo for years. And Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi's declaration that the strength of a console was in the games rang true. The Super Nintendo's strong software library paid dividends. In the end, Nintendo would come out on top of the 16-bit console wars. Super Mario World was released during what many consider the best years of the franchise. In January of 1992, Nintendo Power reported that for each Nintendo system, the NES, Game Boy, and Super NES, the number one game was a Super Mario game. When the Super Nintendo first launched, Nintendo's Vice President of Marketing, Peter Main, commented that the system was evolutionary, not revolutionary. The same could be said about Super Mario World. Mario's 16-bit debut did not significantly change the Mario formula, and many reviewers took issue with that. But Super Mario World did perfect the formula, and today, Super Mario World is widely considered a masterpiece. Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto admitted he was happy with how the game turned out, but he felt that he was only scratching the surface of what video games could become. In a 1995 interview, he said, "I joined Nintendo because I wanted to create a product that people would talk about and remember. And that's what I want to do in the future, too. Create something that will make an impact on the world." Over the next several years, Miyamoto would experiment with new, cutting-edge technologies on the Super Nintendo. And for Nintendo's next console, codenamed Project Reality, Miyamoto would bring the Super Mario series to the third dimension, giving Mario more freedom than ever before. But even with new advancements in technology, Super Mario World stayed with him. Miyamoto would later confess in an interview with USA Today that Super Mario World was one of his favorite Mario games. It was the culmination of everything that made the series great. But more importantly, Miyamoto was proud that it launched the careers of several of his co-workers. Director of Programming Toshihiko Nakago would continue to program countless games for Nintendo. Today, he is the president and CEO of the company he had been programming for years, Systems Research and Development. Level director Katsuya Eguchi would direct his first game, Star Fox, in 1993. Star Fox utilized new technology that pushed the Super Nintendo hardware to its limit. In 2001, he created Animal Forest, later known as Animal Crossing, which gave players their own world to explore. Today, he's a deputy general manager at Nintendo. Map director Hideki Kono would direct one of the best-selling games on the Super Nintendo, Super Mario Kart. Today, he is in charge of the mobile game division at Nintendo. Composer Koji Kondo continued to compose music for Nintendo, and still does today. He has written some of the most memorable tunes in video game history. Shigefumi Hino worked as a character designer for several more years before getting to tackle his own game, the quirky strategy game Pikmin for the GameCube. But Hino's most significant success may have been Yoshi. Yoshi was a hit with women and children, and Nintendo quickly realized they could do more with the character. Yoshi started getting his own line of games, and in 1995, he even starred in a spin-off of the Super Mario series, Yoshi's Island. It's no surprise that the cute green dinosaur is now a staple of the Mario franchise. Hino is still with Nintendo, working as a designer and planner. Director Takashi Tezuka would be heavily involved in just about every future Mario and Zelda game. Today, he is an executive officer in Nintendo's game development division. Over the years, his game design philosophy has remained consistent.
I want to make games that, no matter how many times you clear them, you want to keep that game and hold on to it like a treasure. I want to keep making games with that mindset. Takashi Tezuka.
With Super Mario World, Tezuka succeeded in making a game that people cherished. Nintendo has re-released it many times. In 1994, they included the game in an updated version of the Super Mario All-Stars collection and bundled the game with the Super Nintendo. In 1998, Nintendo released Super Mario World under their Player's Choice banner, an honor given to Nintendo's best-selling games. In the early 2000s, Nintendo ported the game to the Game Boy Advance. Super Mario World has also been available to download on the Nintendo Wii, Wii U, 3DS, and Switch consoles. Some players who grew up with Super Mario World couldn't get enough. In the early 2000s, the internet brought Super Mario World enthusiasts from all over the globe together, and soon fan-made hacks of the game appeared online. One notable genre of hacks, known as Kaizo, contains extremely challenging Super Mario World levels.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh. Oh. No. Oh my god.
In 2015, Takashi Tezuka led development on a dream game for Mario fans, Super Mario Maker. Now, players could make their own levels from various Mario games, including Super Mario World. For more than 30 years, Super Mario World has captivated players young and old. It's no surprise that many people consider it one of the greatest games of all time.
For anyone still on the fence about Super Mario World, the answer is yes. Download it now. This is the apex of 16-bit platforming, a cornerstone of the gaming canon, and most importantly, just as much fun to play today as it was 20 years ago. If you're yet to experience the thrill of discovering a secret exit, the joy of soaring through a level with your Super King, or the unique tragic comedy of accidentally running off a cliff while trying to catch up to a runaway Yoshi, you're in for some of gaming's best loved and most iconic moments. Morgan Sleeper, Nintendo Life.
1990s, Nintendo faced mounting pressure from parent advocates to provide more educational games. With their backs against the wall, Nintendo came up with Mario Paint, an art, music, and animation program for the Super Nintendo. They hoped it would make children, as well as parents, happy. For many kids, it was their first experience with digital art.
I mean, it really was that open world and kind of gateway to creativity. And because it was marketed to people who were playing Super Nintendo games, it wasn't necessarily marketed to artists. It didn't assume you had any art background or any sort of creative background. In fact, the tools in the game, whether they were sort of animation, the art, the coloring, or even the sound design stuff, was all assuming that this was sort of new to you. And that meant that you could be free to just try anything. There was no sort of wrong way to do something.
Mario Paint wasn't fancy. It lacked many features that a computer art program would provide. But, as it is often said, limitation breeds creativity.
You didn't have an infinite number of colors. You didn't have an infinite number of frames you can animate in. You didn't have an infinite size on your canvas. Everything was very restricted to what could fit digitally on that cartridge. For better or worse, it necessitated innovation on your part.
Mario Paint took off and became one of Nintendo's most beloved titles. It inspired a generation of artists, animators, game developers, and musicians. This is the story of Mario Paint. In 1990, it seemed like Nintendo could do no wrong. The Nintendo Entertainment System and its growing library of games was a mainstay in pop culture.
Growing up, I was definitely a Nintendo kid. If you were a kid back then, you could tell that Nintendo was reaching out to you specifically to play their games, to love their brand and their characters. I had Mario blankets, Mario pillows, I had Mario cereal in the morning. We talked about Mario on the bus, on the school, on the playground. We acted out as Mario. So growing up around the time Nintendo was starting to gain popularity, it was super difficult to ignore it. It was everywhere.
But as the company's popularity grew, so did concerns from parents.
Nintendo video systems have become as essential in the American home as microwave ovens and cordless phones, and just about as plentiful. The games are colorful, imaginative, and wondrously entertaining for children and adults. But as annual sales shoot towards $2 billion, some parents are preparing to discard Contra, Commando, Ninja Kid, and the rest of the Nintendo arsenal. Neil Rubin, The Dispatch.
What effects did video games have on children? A small but vocal minority of parents complained that video games made children less sociable and more irritable. They said children suffered from the Nintemper tantrums. Therapists held group sessions for families that felt their children played too many video games. The Council for Children's Television provided guidelines for parents that included limiting playtime, unplugging the system after each use, and refusing to buy violent games. Psychologists mostly disagreed, saying that video games were not inherently dangerous. But there was one thing parent advocates and psychologists did agree on, that video games had the potential to be great educational tools. But there was a little incentive for console developers to make educational games. Historically, educational game sales paled in comparison to traditional video games. In 1989, video game software sales reached $3.5 billion. Educational games only accounted for $350 million, or 10%, and the majority of educational titles were on computers. Nintendo had little success in creating educational games. Back in 1986, during the early days of the NES, they released Donkey Kong Jr. Math. It sold poorly. Anytime you label a game educational, it's the kiss of death, said one Nintendo marketing executive. So instead, Nintendo hoped third-party licensees would step up and provide educational titles. Few did. Developer High Tech Expressions released a series of Sesame Street games that taught letters and numbers. THQ created Videomation, a basic drawing and animation program. Software Toolworks created the Miracle Piano Teaching System, a full keyboard and game that taught kids how to play the piano. Nintendo knew it wasn't enough and feared a growing backlash, but they also saw the challenge as an opportunity. While educational software sales weren't huge, they were rising, and computer-based edutainment games like Oregon Trail and Carmen Sandiego were popular among parents and school systems. There were also long-term benefits. In 1990, births in the United States topped 4 million, the largest number since the 1960s. In a few years, parents would look for educational games for their children. And with the high cost of personal computers, educational games on the cheaper Nintendo systems would be more enticing to consumers. Nintendo also had a massive user base. There were 40 million NES and Famicom consoles worldwide, 20 million in the United States alone, and it was growing. If Nintendo tapped into the edutainment market, they could win over concerned parents and sell even more video games. On May 15, 1990, Nintendo announced a $3 million donation to MIT's Media Laboratory. The lab studied ways to create educational games that didn't make kids feel like they were being forced to learn. Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi stated, "We have long felt that we owe a responsibility to develop our hardware and software to enhance the educational opportunities through our machines. I am confident this program will contribute to a smarter generation than ever existed before." If nothing else, it was a great PR move. But the very next year, there were more problems.
But have things gone a bit too far? This evening, Ken Shockey wraps up a special report on Videomania.
On August 23, 1991, Nintendo released their new 16-bit console, the Super Nintendo, in North America. The console gave players better graphics, better sound, and bigger games. Gamers were excited, but parents were not. The Super Nintendo was not backwards compatible with NES games.
He had the Game Boy, and now he has the Nintendo, and now he'd have to have another unit just for that one game. Doesn't seem right.
It also cost $200, double the price of the NES.
I'm going to say no, and I'm going to explain to him how people market things to make you spend more money.
Parents, once again, felt like Nintendo didn't have their children's best interests in mind. It was time for Nintendo to make something different, something parents and children could be happy about. Their solution was Mario Paint, a digital art, animation, and music program.
Mario Paint is a creative tool for people who have probably never used a creative tool before.
On the surface, Mario Paint seems like it's just a game, and you're right to think that. It's also something that was brilliantly designed to encourage the player to discover not just the limits of the game, but their own limits in their imagination.
Mario Paint was directed and designed by Hirofumi Matsuoka. He joined Nintendo in 1985 as a graphic designer, but with software sales soaring, he was quickly reassigned to game development. He worked on games such as Metroid and Super Mario Land before being named director and designer of Mario Paint. "I got to do what I've always loved, design work," he said. But to create works of art, a controller wouldn't cut it. Previous art programs on consoles used standard controllers, and making anything detailed was a struggle for users. Nintendo wanted Mario Paint to be different, and to be a viable alternative to art programs on personal computers. So they created a mouse, designed by Game & Watch and Game Boy co-creator Satoru Okada.
I didn't get my first actual home PC until several years after Mario Paint came out. So it was the first mouse-based interface that I got to know thoroughly. And I think, it was weird to plug it in. And I think what I found so interesting is that it became very natural, quite quickly because I just got so used to using it. And it was weird to see someone using a mouse on the Super Nintendo, hunched over a table on their couch. But suddenly I was in love with the whole idea of just this sort of digital art interface. And I don't know, maybe if I'd been using some really complicated PC program at the time, it wouldn't have been that way. But because Mario Paint was so accessible, I just fell right into it.
Adding Mario, Nintendo's flagship character, into the game was strategic. It would, of course, drive sales, but it would also show that Nintendo was serious about expanding into edutainment games. In a press release, Nintendo stated, Mario Paint and Mouse will open the doors to a new array of exciting learning games.
I think it was a great decision to have Mario as the main image for Nintendo because Mario games really pull in everybody. And I think we all wish to be just like Super Mario. We all want to have the super abilities to save the day, to do some good. And I think that's what Mario means to me.
In June of 1992, less than a year after the Super Nintendo's launch, Nintendo unveiled Mario Paint at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. Professional artists at the Nintendo booth drew caricatures of attendees.
A couple games that we're, really super excited about. One called Mario Paint, and it basically is the first time a mouse has ever been used in a video game, and kids or adults can animate and take pictures. You can then put music to it. You can save your work. Pretty in-depth and pretty neat product.
Nintendo also announced price cuts to the Super Nintendo. Consumers could now buy a console for just $99.99. Mario Paint cost $59.99. For $160, parents could give their child a digital art program. Compared to the $1,000 price tag of a computer, it was enticing. Mario Paint was released in Japan on July 14th, 1992. It took off quickly. In its first 2 weeks on the market, it became the country's best-selling game, beating out titles like Street Fighter II and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. The next month, Mario Paint shipped to retailers in North America. In December, the game reached Europe. A $6.5 million advertising campaign spread the word. Along with TV commercials, ads for Mario Paint appeared in magazines like TV Guide, Parents, and Good Housekeeping. Nintendo wanted to reach as many parents as possible. The ads read, "Send your kids to art, music, and film school for only $59.95.
What I don't remember is if I'd asked for it, or if my dad had figured out that it was a good idea. But he knew that I was going to be playing video games a lot because that's what I was doing. And in his mind, this was at least something where I could be creative and productive as opposed to just playing the game. So opening up that gigantic box and then just realizing, oh man, I get to work on something was super exciting.
When players turned on Mario Paint, they discovered it was no ordinary game.
When you put in the Mario Paint cartridge, you would think that normally, like any other game, it would just start up and you'd start playing. But with Mario Paint, it doesn't do that. It actually puts you in a position where you need to discover how to enact the game. So you put the game in, it starts up. Mario starts running across the screen, and you have a little cursor point, and Mario will actually run away from you. You have to click on Mario to even start the game. So that's a whole aspect of just discovering that's built into enacting the game.
Each one of the letters is interactive. The R chases Mario off the screen. P paints this picture on the screen. The O turns to a bomb that explodes, and it plays a hidden tune in the game. Another one scrolls the credits of the game. I think it's just all creative fun.
The title screen was only the beginning of the strange world of Mario Paint. An animation of two people working out greeted the player before a blank canvas with various tools appeared before them. It may have seemed overwhelming to some, but Mario Paint encouraged players to experience the game at their own pace.
Mario Paint has a universal language in that regard, and that language being discovery. It literally is something where you need to discover how to play the game in a very playful way. This isn't like other games where it's poorly made, and so you need to figure out how to work these bad tools that that the game designers put in. Mario Paint's not that way. Mario Paint is a very well-designed experience as far as programming goes. It's not that the tools don't work. It's that they don't explain to you how they work, and so you need to discover that for yourself.
When it came to making works of art, Mario Paint contained all the essentials for the budding artist. Multiple-sized brushes, a spray paint tool, a shape maker to create squares and circles, a fill tool to quickly color in blank spaces, text, which included letters, numbers, and even Japanese characters like katakana and kanji, erasers, along with 9 different animations to erase the canvas. Players could even copy and paste. A friendly undo dog got rid of mistakes.
So Nintendo also offered a coloring book section where you can color in pre-recorded art. And they had different options for you to use. They had Super Mario World art with Mario riding Yoshi. They had happy birthday cards you could make. I think if not everyone was a good artist, they probably had some creativeness with coloring or filling in colors with their own ideas, maybe to inspire their creativity to make their own art eventually.
There were also preloaded stamps, shapes, objects, animals, and even characters from Super Mario World. And if that wasn't enough, players could make their own stamps and save up to 15 at a time.
The stamp creator in Mario Paint was something that was pretty exciting because I think for a lot of people, they maybe had never known before how these sprite pieces of art were made in some of their favorite games. Additionally, you could use it for a ton of other things. You didn't have to just make sprite art. You could create patterns, you can create looping images, or you could just do one-off images on their own. Another option you could do with it was to simply just put one pixel in the center, and now you actually have a very fine detailed brush that is the size of one pixel. This could be very good for details.
Mario Paint didn't limit players to still images. There was also an animation tool.
Up until that point, I had no ability to make any kind of animation unless I was, creating like a flipbook, which I also had tried before. And so for me, the idea to take all these sort of silly concepts in my head and actually get a digital animation tool was mind-blowing, as rudimentary as it was.
So for the animation aspect of Mario Paint, you had 3 different options. You had a canvas that was fairly large that you had 4 frames of, or you had a medium-sized canvas that had 6 frames, and then you had a very tiny canvas that had 9 frames. It was up to you to figure out what the trade-offs would be in having a large-scale animation with a shorter number of frames that it could play, or a smaller animation that could have more frames and thus more details to how something was animated.
In addition to drawing and animation, Mario Paint also had something unique to an art program: a music editor, where players could make their own songs.
I remember jumping right into the music player because that's what I was really interested in trying. The music editor featured a whole bunch of different sound effects. They would pair up a sound with a familiar Nintendo character or icon or power-up or something. The guitar is one of my favorites. It's an airplane. The hearts created a bass sound. And if I think of a heartbeat, I think of something very low. So the heart was designed to sound like a very low instrument. The stars were like a twinkle sound. And they had this weird baby face that would make this weird sound like a laugh or a chuckle. And everything was tuned exactly where it needed to be. Even the dogs and the cats would bark and meow right on pitch. Mario Paint came with 3 preloaded songs. I had not
been able to read music very well, but I knew the sounds I wanted to make. I knew where I wanted the sounds to go. I just didn't know how to do it yet. So by listening to the demos, I was able to get a head start on that process. For me, to be able to hear music without playing it was a skill I thank Mario Paint for. As you're drawing on Mario Paint, your music editor, you can see the sequence of notes going higher or see them going down, but you can also hear them as you're putting them on the deck. And that benefit translates very quickly back to us as musicians.
Drawing, animation, and music could be combined to make movies, music videos, and more. The possibilities seemed endless. But there were drawbacks. The cartridge could only save one creation at a time. But Nintendo had a solution.
So you could only save one thing at a time on the Mario Paint cartridge, just had a limited memory, and that was the reality. So one of the things that Nintendo encouraged was for users to hook up their Nintendo to their VCR and save their creations that way, and even share them amongst people. I think they even recommended to send somebody a VHS tape in the mail, some kind of birthday greeting or something. I don't know how many people actually did that, but that was the predominant way to save these things back in the 90s.
I was assigned to do a project on Patrick Henry, and I was really into Mario Paint at the time. And all I did in the animator was a fist pounding a desk. I read the line, "Give me liberty or give me death," over a microphone plugged into the VCR. And I synchronized it with Mario Paint. And that was the scene. That scene took me a couple days to make. So it really made you feel like you were a producer. And I love that.
Mario Paint wasn't just a productivity application. Nintendo also included a minigame called Gnat Attack, where players had to swat flies. It was a nice break from working, symbolized by a coffee cup icon in the bottom right corner.
It was the first time I was ever introduced to using a mouse. And I gotta thank Nintendo for Gnat Attack. Gnat Attack was, I think, a training tool for kids to use a mouse for their very first time.
Despite all of its features, Mario Paint had limits. There were only 15 colors for drawing and stamp creation, most notably a lack of pink. The music editor only allowed 3 notes per beat, and a limited amount of measures for music composition. And the more frames players needed for animation, the smaller the canvas got. But children worked around it and unleashed their creativity.
So I did 2 major things with it. First was I was a huge Mortal Kombat fan. Mortal Kombat was just coming up, and I wanted to recreate all of the insanity that I was seeing in